There are moments in a person's life that act as a fulcrum, a single point upon which the entire rest of their existence pivots. For some, it's the day they meet the love of their life, or the moment they hold their firstborn child. For others, it's a quieter affair, a whisper in the dark that reshapes their soul. For Clara, that moment began not with a whisper, but with a scream, the scream of a kettle, a sound that had always signified comfort in her home, now heralding the end of it. It was the sound of a life being stripped away, a life tied intrinsically to the memory of a man who was more than a father. He was a maestro, an architect of flavor, a man who could weave a story with a pinch of salt and a dash of love. His name was Arthur, and to Clara, he was the sun around which her small world orbited. Arthur was a chef, but that word felt too small, too utilitarian for the artistry he possessed. He was a poet of the palate, a sculptor of sustenance. Their home was a symphony of smells, not just the mechanical, functional smells of dinner, but the layered, complex aromas of a life lived fully. On a Tuesday evening, the air might be thick with the sweet, caramelized tang of roasted root vegetables, intertwined with the earthy, grounding scent of fresh thyme and rosemary. On a rainy Saturday morning, the kitchen would be a sanctuary, the air fogged with the steam of a rich, slow-simmered beef stew, a dish that took an entire day to perfect, a testament to his patience and his profound understanding that some of the best things in life were worth waiting for. His hands were a map of his life, calloused from years of wielding knives and gripping heavy pots, scarred from a few minor burns, yet they moved with the gentle grace of a concert pianist. He could chop an onion with lightning speed, each piece perfectly uniform, tears streaming down his cheeks not from the onion, but from the joy he found in the simple act of creation. For Clara, the kitchen was not just a room in a house, it was a cathedral, and her father was its high priest. He was a man of quiet dignity, of profound, unspoken wisdom. He didn't lecture, he demonstrated. He didn't preach, he practiced. His philosophy, though never articulated as such, was rooted in a deep belief in honor, integrity, and the quiet power of service. He believed that your work was a reflection of your soul, and that you should always, always give more than you took. He embodied this principle in every single dish he prepared. He wasn't just feeding people, he was nourishing their spirits. He would spend hours at the local soup kitchen, not just because it was a charitable act, but because he believed it was his duty, a principle that was as natural to him as breathing. He saw the hungry, the weary, the forgotten, and he offered them not just a meal, but a moment of dignity, a taste of something that reminded them they were human. He'd say, with a twinkle in his eye, "A full belly is a happy heart, Clara. But a heart that knows it's been cared for. That's a different thing entirely." It was this philosophy that he poured into his handwritten recipe journal, a thick, leather-bound book with yellowing pages, filled with his distinct, slanting script. It wasn't just a collection of ingredients and instructions, it was his legacy. It was a treatise on life, written in a language of flour, butter, and stock. He annotated the margins with notes like, "Patience is the key ingredient here," or, "A little kindness, like a sprinkle of salt, can make all the difference." It was the most precious thing he owned, and upon his final, peaceful passing, his heart simply giving out in the kitchen, surrounded by the tools he loved, he left it to Clara. It was his way of saying, "I am with you, always. In every loaf of bread you bake, in every meal you share." He was her anchor, her compass, the steady hand that guided her through the turbulent seas of youth. And when he was gone, that anchor was gone, leaving her adrift in a world that suddenly felt vast and cold. His death wasn't just a loss, it was an earthquake. The epicenter of her world shifted, the foundation of her life ripped away, leaving her standing on shaky ground, looking for something to hold onto. In the immediate aftermath, she found herself not in the comforting cathedral of her childhood kitchen, but in the sterile, judgmental environment of her Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda's home. They were her only living relatives, and in the fog of her grief, she saw them as a lifeline. How wrong she was. Robert was Arthur's older brother, but where Arthur was a giver, Robert was a taker. Where Arthur was humble, Robert was boastful. Where Arthur was quiet and principled, Robert was loud, grasping, and fueled by a desperate hunger for recognition. He saw a world of hierarchies, and he was determined to claw his way to the top, no matter who he had to step on. His wife, Linda, was his perfect complement, a woman of sharp edges and sharper words, whose primary talent was in recognizing vulnerability and exploiting it. Their home, a sprawling, opulent house in a gated community, felt like a gilded cage to Clara. It was a world away from her father's cozy, lived-in kitchen. Here, everything was about appearances, about acquisition, about the things you owned and the status you projected. They had never approved of Arthur. They thought his obsession with food was quaint, almost embarrassing, a low-class profession for a man of their family's standing. They saw his altruism, his work at the soup kitchen, as a waste of time, a foolish and unprofitable pastime. Always the do-gooder, Robert would sneer, a dismissive flick of his wrist accompanying the words. A real man focuses on building an empire, not on peeling potatoes for the unwashed masses. Clara, just 19 and hollowed out by grief, was an easy target. She was the quiet, mousy girl with flour under her fingernails, a living reminder of a brother Robert had secretly despised. He didn't see a grieving child who needed comfort and stability. He saw an inconvenience, a dependent, a freeloader who was cramping his style. He wanted her gone, and for that, he needed a plan. They began by chipping away at her identity, piece by painful piece. They ridiculed her passion for cooking, the very thing that kept her connected to her father. Kneading dough all day. Aunt Linda would scoff, her voice a thin, mocking whine. That's not a future, Clara. That's a waste of a young girl's life. You need to think about making a good impression, finding a husband, not playing in the kitchen like a little girl. Her dream of joining the military was met with utter contempt. It was the one thing she had discovered gave her a sense of purpose, a structure to her chaotic grief. The idea of discipline, of service, of being part of something larger than herself, it felt like a calling. She'd always been captivated by the stories of veterans, their quiet strength, their unshakable sense of duty. She saw the military as the ultimate expression of the principles her father had taught her: selflessness, honor, and a commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But Robert and Linda were horrified. The military? Robert bellowed, his face reddening. That's for men without prospects. It's brutish, it's unladylike, it's a desperate choice for a desperate person. What would people think? They'd say we can't even provide for our own niece. No, absolutely not. You are to focus on finding a suitable position, perhaps as a secretary or a teacher's aide. Something respectable. The real theft, however, was far more insidious, far more cruel than their words. It was a theft of her soul's inheritance. They saw the value in Arthur's recipe journal. They saw not a legacy of love, but a commodity, a golden ticket. Robert was a struggling entrepreneur, a man who had built a small, mediocre food company on the backs of others. He was perpetually on the verge of a big break, yet he lacked the talent, the integrity, and the creativity to ever achieve it. Arthur's journal was the answer to his prayers. It was the treasure map to an empire. When Clara protested, telling them she wanted to go to culinary school, to work, to move out and make her own way, they saw their chance. "You're barely an adult," Linda said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're in no state to make such huge decisions. We can't afford to send you to school, and living here is a strain on our resources. You need to be practical. Give us the journal, Clara. We'll use it as a family project to build a business. Your father would have wanted it that way. It's for the good of the family. It's an investment. You can't possibly understand business at your age. It would just be lost on you." But Clara saw the greed in their eyes. She clutched the journal to her chest. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's all I have of him. It's not yours. It's his words, his heart. I'm going to honor him by learning from it, by becoming the chef he knew I could be. The argument escalated. It was a tempest of emotions, her grief and righteous anger clashing against their cold, calculated cruelty. Finally, Robert's face contorted into a mask of pure venom. He had underestimated her resolve, and it infuriated him. "You ungrateful little brat!" he screamed, his voice shaking the crystal in the china cabinet. "You live under our roof, you eat our food, and this is how you repay us. Your father was a failure, a dreamer who wasted his life in a kitchen. And you are just like him. Weak. Sentimental? A pathetic little girl who will never amount to anything. You want to be a chef? You don't have the stomach for it. You want to be a soldier? You don't have the spine for it. You are nothing. You are just like him." The words were a physical blow. They were the final, crushing nail in the coffin of her childhood. "Get out," Linda hissed, her voice low and final. "Get out of this house and don't come back. We're done with you. Go learn your lesson on the streets." Clara stumbled out into the unforgiving night. It was a downpour, one of those torrential rains that felt biblical, washing the streets clean of their warmth. The rain was like needles on her skin, soaking her through to the bone. She had no money, no friends, and now, no home. All she had was the memory of her father's words, the lingering scent of his kitchen, and a burning, righteous fire in her heart that refused to be extinguished. The storm wasn't just a storm, it was a baptism. It was the burning of her old life, the end of her innocence. In that moment, staring into the cold, unforgiving downpour, Clara made a vow. It was not a prayer, but a promise. A promise to herself, whispered to the storm, a promise to the ghost of her father, and a promise to the God she felt had abandoned her. She would make something of herself. She would not just survive, she would thrive. She would take the love, the honor, the principles her father had instilled in her and forge them into a weapon. And one day, they would all see. They would all see exactly who she was and what her father's legacy truly meant. The recipe for her future was being written in the rain, and it would be a dish served ice cold. The path she took was not one of instant gratification, but of methodical, relentless progress. She didn't just join the military, she clawed her way in. She walked into a recruitment center, her clothes still damp, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. The recruiter, a burly master sergeant with a heart of gold he tried to hide, saw the fire in her eyes. He saw a girl who had hit rock bottom and was looking for a shovel. She passed every test with flying colors. The physical demands were grueling, but she drew strength from the mantra she repeated in her head: honor is not in what you steal. It's in what you give back. She pushed her body to its limits, turning the pain into fuel, the exhaustion into a badge of honor. The mental and emotional discipline she learned was a revelation. For the first time since her father's death, she found a structure that made sense. She had a purpose. She had a team. She belonged. She excelled. Her keen intellect, her attention to detail, and her unshakable composure under pressure were quickly recognized. She was promoted, not just once, but several times. She saw her training not as a path to fight, but as a path to serve. It was the most practical application of her father's philosophy she could imagine. Her unique skills, however, were about to find their most potent expression. Her commanding officer, a grizzled colonel who had seen it all, discovered her background, her father's recipes, her deep connection to the art of cooking. "We have a problem, Lieutenant," he said to her one day, rubbing his temples. "These boys and girls, they've been eating rations for months. Their morale is in the gutter. We need a new strategy. We don't just need to feed them, we need to heal them." It was a disaster relief mission, a massive humanitarian effort following a devastating hurricane. The region was ravaged, the infrastructure destroyed, and thousands of people were displaced and starving. It was chaos, a war against nature and tragedy. Clara saw her chance. She didn't just serve food, she was field promoted to lead a specialized field kitchen unit. It was a logistical nightmare. They had to source supplies from scraps and donations, set up makeshift kitchens in the middle of the muck, and feed thousands in a matter of hours. And then, she unleashed her father's legacy. She remembered every recipe from his journal. She knew them by heart, not just as a list of ingredients, but as a series of emotions. She adapted the recipes to the limited resources, using local, donated ingredients, transforming them into meals that were more than just sustenance. She made a simple chicken stew that tasted like a mother's hug. She baked a flatbread, a variation of her father's sourdough, that seemed to warm people from the inside out. She was a general in the kitchen. She was not just cooking, she was leading, inspiring, and healing. She taught the volunteers, young soldiers who had never boiled water, how to chop an onion with precision, how to season with care. She instilled in them a sense of pride in their work, a belief that what they were doing was the most important thing in the world. A crusty old sergeant, a man who had survived 3 tours of duty, told her, "I've seen a lot of things in my life, Lieutenant. But I've never seen a soldier feed a soul like you do. You make a man feel like a king." The news of her efforts spread. The disaster relief mission was a resounding success, and the name on everyone's lips was Lieutenant Clara. A press photograph of her serving soup to a weeping child, her face etched with compassion, became a symbol of hope. It was in that moment, her uniform splattered with gravy, her hands caked with flour, that she found her true path. She wasn't just following her father's footsteps, she was building a highway upon them. Years passed, a decade of service, discipline, and silent, simmering purpose. She had risen through the ranks, now a commanding officer in her own right. She had a reputation for being just, for being fair, and for being unfailingly principled. The memory of her uncle's betrayal was no longer a raw, weeping wound, it had hardened into a scar. It was a quiet, steady drumbeat in her heart, a constant reminder of what she was fighting against and what she was fighting for. Then, the invitation came. It was for a national gala, a prestigious culinary and service awards ceremony, an event of immense media coverage and public attention. Her former unit had nominated her as a keynote speaker, to receive recognition for her life-saving work in disaster relief. She almost didn't go. The world of culinary awards, of glitz and glamour, felt artificial to her now. But then, she saw the list of honorees. Her Uncle Robert's company was receiving a major award for innovative recipes. The news hit her like a punch to the gut. Her journal? They were being recognized for her father's work. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall, was enough to make her see red. And in that moment of anger, a plan crystallized in her mind. It was not a plan of violence or hatred. It was a plan of revelation. She would not be the poor, grieving girl they'd thrown out in the rain anymore. She was a commander, a leader, a woman of substance. She was going to the gala. The ballroom was a spectacle of crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a gilded cage of a different kind, a temple dedicated to the worship of success and influence. She walked in, not in a gown, but in her full dress uniform, her medals gleaming, her posture as straight as an arrow. The room fell silent as she entered. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. "Who is that? Is that a general? That's Lieutenant." "No, Commander Clara." She was a formidable presence, a stark contrast to the tuxedos and gowns. She saw Robert, resplendent in his tuxedo, his face a mask of arrogant confidence, and her Aunt Linda, dripping in diamonds, her smile smug. Robert's company was at the front table. He was receiving his award for his recipes, the recipes stolen from a dead man's journal, from a grieving child. The host called her to the stage. "And now," he announced, his voice booming across the hall, "a true example of service, a woman who has redefined what it means to nourish a nation. Please welcome, the architect of the largest successful disaster food relief mission in modern history, Commander Clara." The applause was thunderous. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking with the precision of a metronome. She stood there, looking out over the sea of expectant faces. She saw Robert, his smile faltering, a hint of unease in his eyes. He didn't recognize her. Not at first. He saw a stern, powerful woman in a uniform, an inconvenient obstacle on his night of triumph. She began to speak, her voice calm and steady, the voice of a woman who had spent years directing others under intense pressure. She spoke of service, of dedication, of the profound honor in feeding the hungry and healing the broken. It was a speech about principle, about the quiet dignity of giving back. Her words were like honey, soothing and sweet, but with a hidden bitter edge. Then, she came to the crux of her speech. "But true honor," she said, looking directly at her uncle, "can never be built on a foundation of theft." She pressed a button on the remote in her hand. A massive screen behind her flickered to life, projecting enlarged, high-resolution images of her father's recipe journal. The crowd gasped. The pages were unmistakable, the yellowed edges, the intricate, looping handwriting, and the dates, clear as day, predating Uncle Robert's company's founding by years. She didn't speak, she let the evidence speak for itself. The room was deathly silent, the only sound the soft whirring of the projector. Robert's face turned a ghastly shade of white, the color of a man who has just been thrown into ice-cold water. He started to rise from his seat, his mouth opening to form a protest, a lie, anything to stop the narrative. But as he got to his feet, 3 men, older veterans in their own dress uniforms, were already moving. They were not aggressive, they were like a silent, impenetrable wall. One, a gruff-looking man with a silver beard, simply placed his hand on Robert's shoulder. "Sit down, sir," he said, his voice a low, respectful rumble that left no room for argument. "Let the woman speak." Robert was trapped. His outrage was impotent. He was a cornered animal, and the whole world was watching. Aunt Linda had covered her face with her hands, her diamonds glinting under the spotlight, a symbol of the shame that was now engulfing her. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. You could have heard a pin drop in the silence that followed the image. It was a silence that was loud. It was the sound of a lie being dismantled, brick by brick. The room was waiting for her to pulverize him. They were expecting her to sue him, to publicly eviscerate him, to destroy him. But she didn't. She let the silence hang for a moment that felt like an eternity. It was a moment of power. Then, she spoke again, her voice soft, yet it carried to every corner of the cavernous ballroom. "I could take this man to court," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, finally landing on her uncle's face, a face that was now a mask of utter defeat. "I could have you all remember him as a thief. I could destroy the company he built on the back of my father's life's work." She paused. She could see the fear in his eyes. She could see the collapse of his entire world. She had him right where she wanted him. She could have him arrested, humiliated, financially ruined. It was the moment of revenge that she had been waiting for, the one that had fueled her for over a decade. She could finally make him pay for every cruel word, every dismissive glance, for the night he threw her out into the rain. But in that moment, a wave of profound clarity washed over her. It was a feeling, a deep sense of quiet, that stopped her. She saw his eyes, and for a fleeting second, she didn't see the monster, she saw a pathetic, desperate man. A man who had let greed consume him to the point where he had lost all sense of honor. She saw the hollowness in his success. He had built a kingdom, but he was the only one in it. He had stolen her father's legacy, but he would never, ever know the joy, the simple, profound joy of creating something with his own hands and heart. He would never understand the love that was baked into every single recipe, the principle that was the real ingredient. He had everything, and he had nothing. He had gained the whole world, but he had lost his soul. And Clara, in that moment, with the power to destroy him, realized that revenge wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about her soul. It was about honoring her father's legacy, not by taking, but by giving. She took a deep breath. "But I'm not going to do that," she continued, her voice filled with a newfound strength, a strength born of compassion, not anger. "Because my father was a man who believed in second chances. He believed that the greatest strength was not in taking, but in giving. He believed that the truest form of honor is not what you steal, but what you give back." She stepped away from the podium, walking towards the front of the stage, looking directly at the now shaken audience. "And that is what I am going to do. I am not here to tear down a man for his mistakes. I am here to build something from the ashes of his error." She announced the establishment of a new foundation. It would be called the Arthur Project. It was a non-profit organization dedicated to teaching cooking and discipline to homeless youth. It would be a sanctuary for lost kids who had been thrown out in the rain, just like she had been. It would be a place where they could find a sense of purpose, a skill, and, most importantly, a family. It would be the ultimate tribute to her father's life, a living, breathing monument to his philosophy of service. "We will teach them the art of cooking," she declared, "and more importantly, the art of living. We will teach them that they are not failures. We will teach them to believe in themselves. We will give them the tools to build a better life, a life of honor." When she finished, the applause was not just applause, it was a roar. It was a cathartic release, a wave of emotion that washed over the room. They were not just clapping for her, they were clapping for the principle she had just embodied. She had turned a night of potential destruction into a night of profound creation. The cameras flashed, immortalizing the moment. Robert and Linda were left in the shadows, as forgotten as the dust in an old cupboard. She had not gotten revenge in the way the world understands it. She had not ruined them. She had simply shown the world who they were, and let them wither in the light of truth. She had won a victory far greater than any lawsuit. She had won a victory over her own heart. The story of that night is not of a person who sought to destroy, but of a person who sought to heal. It's a story of how one woman, armed with nothing but the memory of her father's love and the strength of her own convictions, turned the greatest betrayal of her life into a cornerstone of hope for others. She carried the weight of her father's honor, not as a burden, but as a mission. The end of the story is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. It's a quiet dawn. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and rose. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of a new day. Clara was in the field kitchen of her base, the one place that felt more like home than any building in the world. There was no gala here, no cameras, no awards. There was just her, the familiar rhythm of kneading dough, and the soft, encouraging sounds of the sunrise. She was making her father's signature bread, the one he used to make for her on her birthday. It was a simple, rustic loaf, but it was infused with a lifetime of love. The smell filled the small room, a scent of warmth, of comfort, of home. She wasn't thinking about Uncle Robert. She wasn't thinking about the awards. She wasn't even thinking about her father's death. She was just thinking about the future, about the foundation, about the kids she was going to help. She was thinking about a new recipe, one of her own, a recipe for hope. The door opened and a young soldier, a private barely out of his teens, poked his head in. "Commander? What are you doing up so early?" he asked, his voice full of sleepy curiosity. She looked up, a genuine smile spreading across her face, erasing the tired lines from her skin. She held up a piece of the still warm dough. "I'm baking, son," she said. "I'm baking the future." Outside, as the first rays of the sun reached over the wall, Clara thought about her father. She could almost hear him, his voice a gentle echo in her mind, a whisper on the wind. "Well done, my darling," he seemed to say. "You made them see. You made them feel." And for the first time since that rainy night so long ago, Clara felt a deep, profound peace. It was not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of understanding. She understood that the true recipe for honor was not in the ingredients, but in the love and integrity with which you combine them. She had taken revenge, not by destroying her enemies, but by proving them wrong, by living a life so full of purpose and principle that they were rendered insignificant. She had taken the pain of the storm and used it to water a garden of hope. She had lived by her father's code, not just in her words, but in her actions. As the golden light of the new dawn filled the kitchen, warming the flour-dusted counter, Clara knew that she had finally, truly, come home.